Hi, Sean from Flicker of Myth here, and today I'm going to talk about Suicide Squad. No, not the new James Gunn directed quasi-sequel, but the 2016 David Ayer directed one, basically the one nobody really liked. I haven't seen the film in its entirety since it came out 5 years ago, so I was kind of curious to dig back in before the new one comes out and just see how it holds up with a fresh pair of eyes, if you like. It's no secret, of course, that David Ayer's film went down like a lead balloon with critics upon release, but that didn't stop it grossing almost $750 million worldwide, which is an extremely impressive return on a $175 million budget. Before we dig into the bulk of the review, I just wanted to lay down some context first. Suicide Squad was released in August of 2016, just a few months after Batman v Superman came out, and of course had a very mixed to negative reception from critics, and disappointed at the box office. It was hardly a bomb. It grossed $870 million worldwide, I believe. But when you consider that this is Batman fighting Superman, two of the most iconic comic book characters of all time, they should have easily cracked $1 billion, if not $1.5 billion. But alas, once word got out that the film was a hot mess, it suffered a historic second weekend box office drop from which it never recovered. Suicide Squad was already deep in post-production at the time that Batman v Superman was released, and reports indicate that Warner Brothers basically went into panic mode and tried to go about fixing Suicide Squad's tone to be less dour and sort of grim and dark, as many critics believed was one of the big issues with Batman v Superman. The problem, of course, is that David Ayer wrote and directed this film as a grittier, more serious piece of work, and so Warner Brothers had to spend apparently $22 million on reshoots to try and make it more sort of breezy and light-hearted. I think they were aiming for like a kind of Guardians of the Galaxy kind of ensemble vibe. As a result, the film's editing process was infamously very strained. Warner Brothers and David Ayer went to war over which cut of the film was actually going to make it to cinemas. And I think you can kind of sense that tension in the way that the film's marketed. If you remember, the original Comic-Con teaser was very serious and to the point, whereas the later trailers kind of introduced pop music and really slick editing. And those trailers, to their credit, were phenomenally put together, and I think probably the main reason that the film made as much money as it did. But the film itself was, by most reports, hacked to pieces during post-production, as Warner Bros. Tried to figure out what would be the most commercially viable version of the film to put out there. There were several competing cuts of the film in the fray, and Warner Bros. Eventually settled on a very quick-cutting, super stylish, edgy version, which was apparently put together by Trailer Park, a company who specialises in editing trailers, and actually edited at least some of the trailers for Suicide Squad. This makes a lot of sense when you consider what is perhaps Suicide Squad's single biggest problem, that it feels like a 2-hour trailer. Right from its very first scene, this is a film that just throws so much sensory stimuli at the viewer, just trying to get them interested in 8 different things, but not allowing any single thing in the film to just breathe. The film begins with Amanda Waller sat around a table for about 20 minutes while basically various exposition dumps are dropped in her and our lap. A series of frantically edited montages introduce us to the likes of Harley, Quinn and Deadshot. We learn all about their characters, their melodramatic pasts, their goals. Batman, the Joker, the Flash are all thrown in there. And it's very easy to get the impression that this is not the way the film was meant to unfold when it was shot. This feels like a patch job. It feels like someone trying to energize a material that isn't quite working, trying to prop it up with, stylish visuals and quick cut editing. I think maybe my biggest gripe with the film overall, and especially in the first act, is just the abusive amount of pop music used. As James Gunn himself has proven, a great pop song can really make a scene pop, but it can also be kind of cringeworthy and embarrassing when it just feels forced and unearned, and I think that's the problem with a lot of the musical selections in this film. Every single musical choice is like the most obvious, basic, on-the-nose one you could possibly make, and it's so painfully obvious that they're trying to create a mood and a vibe that was not present when this was actually being shot. As you can probably tell, I don't really like the first act of this movie very much at all. I think it uses a lot of lazy narrative and aesthetic devices to introduce characters and storylines to the audience. It also gives you a hell of a lot of information to digest up front, and on top of that, it's a slave to, the DC extended universe. So like I say, we've got the Joker, we've got Batman, we've got the Flash, just thrown in there when the film doesn't really need them. And we'll talk now quickly about Jared Leto's interpretation of the Joker, because honestly, it might surprise you, but I don't really have a whole lot to say about it. I don't hate the performance as much as I think a lot of people do. It was certainly radical, and the design of the character, I didn't love it like most people, but I think that he gives you so little here because he's in the film so briefly that I can't even get a bead on what he was trying to do. I think with a better script, people would have forgotten about the way the character looked pretty quickly. But considering that the Joker doesn't even really feel like a character in this movie, I can understand why people got hung up on the idea he looks like someone who got kicked through a Hot Topic store. It's well known that Jared Leto's role was cut down significantly during post-production, but I have to wonder why he even really needed to be in this film at all. Obviously, there's the cynical reason that they wanted to set up a future showdown between Batman and the Joker, but ironically this never even ended up happening, unless you count that really weird scene in Zack Snyder's Justice League, where the Joker makes a joke about pulling Batman off.
Who's gonna give you a reach around?
So anyway, let's get back to the first act of the movie, where we're introduced to other members of the Suicide Squad like El Diablo, Killer Croc, and the villain Enchantress as well. And yeah, again, we're 20 minutes into the movie at this point, and I just feel completely exhausted. The film doesn't really give you a second to soak anything in. It is just rat-a-tat, machine gun fire. Here is a bunch of characters and a bunch of plot, and no time at all to actually make sense of it. From here, the team of violent criminals are brought together to try and stop Enchantress, who's off somewhere turning any human she can into a minion of hers, and also summon a hideous CGI brother Incubus. Now this should be the point where the film really starts to hit its stride, where you've got these anti-heroes coming together, we're going to get lots of cool banter, it's going to be fun, they're going to team up, be on maneuvers to take down, eventually, Enchantress, right? But the entire first act of the movie is over before the team is even properly brought together. Compared to Guardians of the Galaxy, which had the central heroes like squabbling with each other within a solid 20 minutes or so. There's also some really clunky dialogue throughout this film, which I really don't like. Some really lousy attempts to be funny, and I think a lot of people will agree, probably the lousiest title drop in film history.
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
Still, even that is better than this.
I would advise not getting killed by her. Her sword traps the souls of its victims.
You can really sense the film trying to be Guardians of the Galaxy for the DCEU. You know, the characters constantly talk about how bad they are and how fun it is to be bad.
We're bad guys. It's what we do.
We're the bad guys.
But it's just not witty or fun. Like, from its story to its characters, this is such a dreary, dull, I'd even say soulless film. The rough script does make more sense when you consider that David Ayer had just 6 weeks to write this film. You know, and that would be a short time for the tiniest indie, let alone a almost $200 million blockbuster, especially when you consider that he's never made a film of this scale before. So back to the story now, the squad is on their mission to take down Enchantress, which leads to a generic shootout with a bunch of her weird monster things that we as the audience have very little frame of reference for. It's a big, boring, monotonous shootout in a low-lit, drab environment. Is this what anyone wants to see out of a $175 million superhero movie? So this boring action scene is followed by another monotonous, tedious fight/shootout, whatever. Just the lack of inventiveness of the action is really frustrating because the film had a massive budget and some of the visual effects actually look really good. All the stuff with El Diablo looks fantastic, and yet the film is so committed to being aggressively grey. Like it should have been candy coloured and really popped, you know, like Speed Racer or something, but instead it just blurs into this cinematic sludge. So now we're at basically the third act of the movie where Enchantress and Incubus are prepping their beam in the sky bullshit thing, and it doesn't really matter, I don't know. And at this point, the Suicide Squad hunkers down in a bar to have one last drink before the final battle. This scene really tries to hammer home that the Suicide Squad are like unconventional family, kind of like the Guardians of the Galaxy, except nothing in the movie leading up to this has convinced us of this whatsoever. In a better film, the bar scene would be instantly iconic, but because we're never persuaded that these people care about each other or that we should care about them, it just falls completely flat. There's some good stuff in this scene, but it just never really feels earned, especially when you consider that half the characters here have spoken maybe a couple of lines each.
Whiskey.
It's really only Harley Quinn and Deadshot that have particularly convincing chemistry in this film, and while most of the character interactions might play a bit better if the film wasn't so aggressively hacked to pieces, I think they really needed like a James Gunn type filmmaker to nail the right tone. From here, the film is basically just a sprint to take down Enchantress and Incubus. I think the final battle in this film is only really memorable because of Cara Delevingne's performance as Enchantress, which is just ridiculous. The hip shaking, the dancing, the weird CGI, that ridiculous voice.
I am your ally, and I know what you want.
I have no idea what she or David Ayer was thinking with this. And to make things worse, she stood right next to the CGI abomination that is Incubus, who just looks like any generic video game villain. Just none of the action here is interesting or in any way fun. I think a film like this needed smaller, more intimate stakes that were actually relevant to the characters. I don't think a film like this needs these like world-destroying end of the world stakes. But of course movie studios think nobody will actually buy a ticket unless the fate of the world is at stake, and that's how we end up with tedious gunk like this. So I've spent a while now basically dunking on this film, but I do have to say I don't hate the film. I don't think it's like the worst thing ever. I just think it's not a particularly good film that could have actually been really good. It's not a good piece of cinema, but there are some things I like about it, so I'm going to talk about them briefly now. The most obvious thing is the cast for this movie is pretty great. Viola Davis, for one, is superbly cast as Amanda Waller and one of the film's few bright spots. Will Smith does the absolute best he can with the script, and he's his usual charming, funny self, sure. But this is unquestionably Margot Robbie's film. She is excellent as Harley Quinn. She runs away with every scene she's in, and Harley Quinn is really the only character that manages to sort of truly stand out from the just bland beigeness of the story and action. I thought Jay Hernandez is also pretty good as El Diablo, but he doesn't really get much to do other than sacrifice himself. Still, at least he wasn't playing Slipknot, right? I think this is the first time I ever actually enjoyed a Jai Courtney performance, so that's honestly one of the film's biggest achievements. I will say as well, this will probably sound really weird, but I really, really like the scene where Rick Flag is just randomly destroying a chicken drumstick like there's no tomorrow. It makes me laugh because I just imagine Joel Kinnaman grabbing a chicken drumstick from craft services while David Ayer's over here trying to set up a shot and just wondering what the hell he's doing. In my opinion, it's one of the most memorable parts of the movie. Anyway, I digress. All in all, Suicide Squad 2016 is undeniably a massively missed opportunity. They needed to settle on a consistent tone before they started shooting, and I think they also needed to spend a lot more time in pre-production on designing the action sequences to accentuate and reflect the characters. It's stunning to me that a film with so many talented people in it comes off so utterly flat. It's energetic and violent, and yet it has so little in the way of personality or charm. Since the release of Zack Snyder's Justice League, we've had this release the Ayer cut hashtag going around. People are trying to basically get Ayer's original vision of the film released, and Ayer himself has even championed the hashtag. This was quickly shot down by Warner Brothers, and to be honest, I think that's probably the right call, because I'm just personally not convinced that there is actually a much superior version of this film out there. I think even if you gave Ayer proper time to work on the script and deliver something that he really wanted to, I just don't think he was the right guy for this job. Again, I think you need someone more like a James Gunn, who thankfully we now do have. I think we're just fortunate that the film did well enough that Harley Quinn's had her own spin-off projects, and Warner Brothers was confident enough to roll the dice on the new James Gunn movie. This certainly isn't a film that's improved with age. I don't think anyone's going to be discovering this as a sort of underappreciated cult classic in the years to come. Though hopefully with 5 years of emotional distance from its release, we can all sort of let go of our anger and just move on. So this has been my revisitation of Suicide Squad 2016, but what about you? What have you made of it? Have you rewatched it recently? Did it hit differently for you? Let us know in the comments. Thanks as always for watching, and keep it here on the myth that is flickering.